He seemed perfect. So perfect, she told herself she was going crazy. For months, she explained away every single warning sign. It was just a quirk. It was a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of his passion. By the time she finally let herself see the truth, her savings were gone, her sanity was shattered, and she'd lost every ounce of trust in her own judgment. This is the story of how her own denial, her hope, and her decision to ignore every red flag that led to the complete collapse of her life. And it has to be told, because the most dangerous threats don't show up with a warning. They arrive with a charming smile and the promise of everything you've ever wanted. Before him, her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. It was stable. She had a job she was good at, a small but fiercely loyal circle of friends, a savings account that was actually growing, and a quiet confidence in who she was. She was content. She wasn't looking for a hero or some whirlwind romance. But that's exactly how he showed up. It was like her world had been in black and white, and then he walked in and cranked up the color. He was charismatic, smart, ambitious, and he had a way of looking at her that made her feel like the only person in the universe. In the beginning, she felt like she'd won the cosmic lottery. She didn't see a risk, she saw a reward for all her years of hard work and sensible choices. The irony, of course, is that he would be the single most expensive investment of her life, one that would cost her not just her money, but her peace of mind. Chapter 1, The Honeymoon and the First Cracks. Those first few months were just a blur of intoxicating attention. Constant texts, surprise flowers, elaborate dates she knew he probably couldn't afford, and talks that lasted till the sun came up. He learned her deepest fears and her biggest dreams and then mirrored them back at her, making her feel seen in a way she never had. It was overwhelming, and she confused that intensity with depth. This was the first, and maybe the most seductive, red flag. Red flag number 1, love bombing as a tool for isolation. He didn't just want to be in her life, he wanted to be her life. Her friends, he'd say, were nice enough, but did they really get the kind of pressure he was under? Did they really get us? He'd create these tiny, almost unnoticeable wedges. A casual comment about a friend being a little judgmental, or how her family seemed stuck in their ways. He'd plan a surprise romantic weekend on the same weekend as her best friend's birthday, forcing her to choose, and then making her feel terrible if she even hesitated. Bit by bit, her world started shrinking until it was just him. He made himself the center of her universe, and because it felt so damn good to be the center of his, she didn't see that he was systematically cutting off her support systems. Isolation is a tactic for control. Friends and family are mirrors, they show you the reality you might not want to see. By pushing them away, he made sure the only reflection she saw was his. She wasn't just in a relationship, she was in a bubble he had carefully built. And from inside that bubble, it was impossible to see the warnings for what they were. He had this way of framing everything as a grand, romantic gesture. Canceling her weekly dinner with her sister to take her on a last-minute trip wasn't about control, it was passion. Questioning her friendships wasn't jealousy, it was about protecting our special connection. Every isolating move was gift-wrapped in the language of love, and she was so drunk on the affection that she completely missed the strategy behind it. She was so flattered, she didn't realize she was being cut off from everyone who might have saved her from what was coming. Chapter 2, The Quirks Become Patterns. Once the bubble was sealed, the real red flags started to pop up, no longer hidden by romance. They were jarring, confusing, and always followed by some masterful explanation that left her questioning her own mind. Red flag number 2, the grandiose plans and the financial voids. He talked a big game. He was always on the verge of a huge breakthrough, a tech startup, a crypto deal, a consulting gig that was going to change everything. He dressed perfectly, knew all the right things to say at fancy restaurants, and spoke with an authority that just made you believe him. The details, though, were always fuzzy. The company was in a stealth phase. The investors were big names he couldn't talk about. His bank account was temporarily frozen because of some complex international transfer. Then the small requests started. Can you spot me for dinner? My card's acting up. Could you cover rent this month? The deal closes next week, I'll pay you back double. Every time, it was an emergency, a temporary setback on their road to a glorious future. And because she believed in him, because she was invested in him, she helped. It started with a few $100s. Then a few thousand. She told herself, this is what partners do. You support their dreams. This is classic financial abuse. It wasn't just about the money he was taking, it was about creating a power dynamic where she was dependent on his future success while he was dependent on her current cash. He made her feel like their financial futures were linked, but in reality, he was just draining hers. She ignored the huge, glaring inconsistency. The guy who claimed to be friends with millionaires couldn't buy his own groceries. The truth was just too scary to face, because admitting he was a financial mess meant admitting the whole dream was a lie. So, she kept paying, telling herself she was funding their future, when really, she was financing her own destruction. Red flag number 3, the Jekyll and Hyde of emotional whiplash. The most disorienting red flag was the emotional roller coaster. 90% of the time, he was the man she fell for, kind, attentive, loving. But that other 10%. It was terrifying. A switch would flip over nothing, a question he thought was accusatory, her being 5 minutes late, the wrong tone in her voice. He'd turn cold, cruel, and distant. His words would cut her with surgical precision, aimed right at the insecurities she'd shared with him in their late-night talks. He'd say things to make her feel small, stupid, and worthless. And then, just as fast as it started, it would stop. The storm would pass, and he'd be back, horrified at what he'd done. He'd be filled with guilt, often crying, begging her to forgive him. "I'm so sorry," he'd whisper. "It's just the stress from this deal. It's not you. I love you so much it scares me, and sometimes I just lash out." This cycle is the engine that powers a toxic relationship. The abuse creates fear, and the tearful apology that follows creates hope. This emotional whiplash kept her in a constant state of confusion. It warped her sense of reality. Was he the cruel man who said those awful things, or the broken one who cried in her arms? She clung to the good version, telling herself that was the real him. She spent all her energy trying to keep the bad version from showing up, shrinking herself and walking on eggshells. She didn't realize that both versions were him. She was in a relationship with both the dream and the nightmare, and the constant switching between them was breaking her down. Chapter 3, The Sunk Cost Fallacy in Action. About a year in, the red flags weren't just flags anymore. They were a screaming, blaring, neon-lit parade. Her savings were disappearing, her friends were distant, and her stomach was in a constant knot. She had this one moment of pure clarity. A friend she hadn't seen in months reached out, worried about her. For just a few hours, the fog lifted. She saw the patterns. She saw the manipulation. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to her core, that she had to leave. But she didn't. Why? Because she'd already invested too much. It's a psychological trap called the sunk cost fallacy. It's that voice in your head that says you have to keep going because of all the time, money, and effort you've already put in. She looked at the year of her life, the thousands of dollars, the emotional energy she'd poured into this man, and walking away with nothing felt like a loss she couldn't accept. It felt easier to just keep digging and hope she'd strike gold. She told herself, if I leave now, all of that pain was for nothing. She convinced herself that the next deal would finally come through, that he'd finally get the help he needed, that their love would fix everything. Hope is a beautiful thing. But in a toxic relationship, hope is the fuel that keeps you burning. It's an addiction. You get addicted to the potential of who they could be instead of accepting the reality of who they are. This is when denial becomes a conscious choice. You're not just explaining away red flags, you're actively hiding them. She started lying to her family about how they were doing. She defended him to the few friends who still dared to ask questions. She became his accomplice in her own downfall. The sunk cost fallacy wasn't just about her bank account, it was about her heart. She'd invested her entire sense of self into us, and letting go of him felt like letting go of herself. She was so terrified of the short-term pain of leaving that she signed up for the long-term devastation of staying. Chapter 4, The Collapse. The end wasn't a slow fade. It was an explosion. It was swift, brutal, and absolute. His big deal, the one that was supposed to solve all their problems and pay her back for all her loans, was a complete and total lie. It never existed. She found out by accident. A letter from a collections agency showed up, addressed to her. It was for a high-interest loan of $10,000, taken out in her name, with her signature expertly forged. Her blood ran cold. She started digging. She finally opened the shared credit card statement she'd been too afraid to look at. There were charges from hotels she'd never seen, expensive dinners with people she'd never met, and cash withdrawals that made her physically sick. When she confronted him, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. There was no remorse. No tears. No apology. The charming, broken man she loved was gone. In his place was a cold, empty stranger. He looked at her with a mix of pity and contempt and said the words that would ring in her ears for years, "I thought you were smarter than this. It was just business." In that 1 second, her whole world imploded. It wasn't just the money, though that loss was catastrophic. It was the complete demolition of her reality. The man she loved didn't exist. The future she had sacrificed everything for was a lie. The last 2 years of her life had been built on a foundation of deceit. The aftermath was a wasteland. She was broke, in debt, and dealing with legal issues from the loan. But the financial cost paled in comparison to the psychological one. She was diagnosed with severe anxiety and CPTSD. She had panic attacks so bad she thought she was dying. For months, she couldn't trust her own mind. Was any of it real? Did he ever love her, or was it all an act? Her self-worth was gone. She felt like a fool, ashamed to face the very friends and family who had tried to warn her. The highest price she paid wasn't the money in her bank account, it was the trust in her own judgment. When you ignore your gut for that long, you forget what its voice even sounds like. Her inner compass was broken, and she was completely lost. Hitting rock bottom was the most painful, and the most clarifying, moment of her life. Only in the silence, after he was gone, could she finally start to hear her own voice again. It was faint and bruised, but it was there. And for anyone who might be in that same confusing place right now, if you've ever ignored a red flag or felt that sick feeling in your gut, share your story in the comments. Let's create a space where we can see we're not alone, and remind each other that seeing the red flags isn't failure, staying is. Chapter 5, The Reckoning and the Rebuilding. Crawling out of that wreckage wasn't some cinematic montage. It was slow, ugly, painful work. It was therapy sessions where she just cried. It was making a humiliating budget to start chipping away at the mountain of debt. It was making shameful phone calls to the friends she'd pushed away, apologizing and asking for their help. It was finally learning to sit with the crushing loneliness she had been so desperate to run from, the very fear that made her vulnerable to him in the first place. The hardest part was learning to trust herself again. Her therapist told her something she'll never forget: your intuition didn't fail you. You failed your intuition. She was right. That little voice, that gut feeling, had been there the whole time. She just chose to ignore it. So, she started listening. She started journaling, not about him, but about her. What did she want? What were her deal breakers? She had to find out who she was without him at the center of everything. Rebuilding her finances was practical. Rebuilding her self-esteem was a war. It meant she had to forgive herself for her own denial. To understand that manipulative people are experts at what they do, and she wasn't stupid for falling for it, she was human. She had to relearn that her value isn't tied to a partner, and that being alone is infinitely better than being in a relationship that demands you erase yourself. Common person perspective. From the outside, it looked like she had everything under control. A beautiful relationship, a charming boyfriend, and a life that seemed stable. But what no one saw was the silent erosion of her confidence, day by day, as manipulation crept in under the guise of love. He wasn't just a liar, he was a performer. The kind of man who could make deception feel like devotion. While she gave her loyalty, he gave his attention to someone else, all while convincing her that she was overthinking, being too emotional, too suspicious. It's not just the betrayal that stings, it's the slow realization that the person she trusted most had been slowly rewriting the truth, not only for her but for himself. And when it all unraveled, it wasn't just a breakup. It was a collapse of reality as she knew it. She didn't just survive it, she learned to see clearly again. And now, every red flag she once ignored is a reminder of how far she's come. The experience taught her the difference between love and control, between support and exploitation, and between hope and denial. And the peace she has now, this quiet confidence in her own judgment, that's non-negotiable.